Well, hello there, YouTube. This is Noob DM Ariel coming to you again from Northern California. It's a beautiful Saturday once again, D&D Saturday here in Kelseyville. And today I will be continuing my discussion of the Dungeons and Dragons game systems, um, with a comparison, a compare and contrast of races. This time around, we'll take a look at the races or some of the races in second edition versus the races in the current fifth edition game. And I was taking a look at the races to kind of see the differences in both systems. And to be honest, there's not a whole lot of differences. They didn't change a whole lot in between those the years between second and fifth, although fifth edition does omit or leave out a couple some things or change story element or not story but racial elements here and there in order to improve I think to segment playability, especially with the elves. They changed a little bit of things. I think it's all lore based, but anyway, there's some changes between the two, and we'll take a look at that. Um, what I will say about the second edition character races, I've mentioned before in previous videos that one thing that I wasn't really on board or didn't really understand or like that much about the second edition races is there are racial ability requirements. I think if I'm not mistaken, this carried over from first edition, where you have what you usually do no matter what system you play, you roll up your scores or your abilities. So you have your strength, your dexterity, your constitution, your intelligence, your wisdom, and your charisma. It's the six normal stats for D&D that everybody's familiar with. And but in second edition they had racial ability requirements. So in order to be a dwarf, for example, you had to have a strength of a minimum strength, and admittedly they weren't too high in most cases. So in order to be a dwarf, you had to have a minimum ability. Alert. Sorry about that. You have to have minimum ability of 8 on your ratio. That's your racial ability requirement, and a minimum constitution of 11, and a minimum. Those were the highest. So you basically had to have high strength and high constitution to be a dwarf, for example. To be an elf, you basically just need a high intel. Well, average is about 10, so you need an 8 on as a minimum intelligence, so it's not too high. And then charisma, you also need an 8. So you couldn't be an elf if you didn't meet this racial ability or any race if you didn't meet this racial ability requirements. So that was kind of something different. Um, I thought what was interesting is um, looking across the spectrum all the way from first edition to like the more current edition, which is 5e. You have I was kind of surprised. Well, I shouldn't be surprised because it's been a number of years between all the editions, but excuse me, fifth edition had the most or has fifth edition has the most and I'm talking about just the core books, just the player's handbook. I know that other supplements will add to the system, but in terms of just what you get when you buy the player's handbook to in order to be a player and play the game, 5e gives you the most variety in terms of races. So we're talking about races now. And the original races in first edition, there was 7 of them. It was the dwarves, the elves, the half elves, the gnomes, the halfling, the half orcs, and the human. So they had four or five, yeah, 7 classes. And this was the same for third edition, by the way. They didn't change anything for third edition. They just went back to having those basic 7 familiar races. Second edition, there are only 6 races. They did away with the half orc, and which is kind of a shame. But the reasoning behind that was by 1989, when second edition was Player's Handbook was printed. they had D&D had just, and I've talked a little bit about this, but D&D, TSR, which were the makers of D&D, had just got a lot of flack from parents groups and from the whole satanic scare that happened in the 80s, and well, because they had devils and demons and magic and warlocks and stuff like that. um, it wasn't it got a negative reputation in some circles, which is ridiculous. But that be that as it may, the half orc was always thought of as an evil race, and orcs in general. But the half orc was problematic to some people because in order to have a half orc, you know, an orc has to mingle um, with the human, and therefore you get another race, and you get the half orc. So it was a kind of a mixing of the races between humans and an evil race, thought of evil. Orcs are always thought of evil, and there's an actual backlash against evil races now in fifth edition. And maybe I'll make a commentary about that at a later time. I don't know if I talked about it or not, but at any rate, that's why they dropped the half orc from second edition. So you only get the 6 instead of the 7 races. And as I mentioned earlier, fifth edition actually added more races, and the current game has a total of 9 races you can choose from. And again, this is not talking about supplements or anything like that, just the bare player's handbook. So you can be a dwarf, an elf, a gnome, a half elf, all the regular races. But in addition to that, they brought back the half orc, which second edition had dropped. They actually brought the half orc back in third edition. He was missing from fourth edition for some reason. Fourth edition had no half orc, but they had the Eladrin type of elf, or I think they're elves, but the Eladrin were in there, sort of replaced the half orc. And then in fifth edition, no Eladrin, but they brought back the half orc. And but in addition to those races, they added the Dragonborn, which were originally introduced in fourth edition. They added the Tiefling, which is also an addition from fourth edition. So now there are a total of nine races, um, some of which came from fourth edition in the current game. So you have more races than you ever had before. So that's a good thing to have choice, or to have more choice, I think. So specifically, now that we got that out of the way, let's take a look um, at how. Let's take a critical or a more in-depth look at how the second edition races, specifically the dwarf, the human, and the elves, which are 3 of the most popular races, how or played races, how those differed in second edition to the current game. All right, guys. So, speaking of the dwarves, we're gonna start with fifth edition, the current edition or the current game. So, what do you get if you play a dwarf? Well, some of the dwarf traits in fifth edition include an ability score increase of your Constitution score goes up by 2, because dwarves are supposed to be tough, and they're supposed to be resilient. A lot of them can be fighters and warriors. So despite their small stature, size, their constitution score increases by 2. And I mentioned size, so they stand typically between 4 and 5 feet tall and average about 150 pounds. So they're considered like medium type in terms of the size scale. And they have always had dark vision. So that means that because they're used to being underground, they have superior vision in the dark and dim conditions. They can see dim light within 60 feet, as if it was bright light. So this information is found on the racial traits for the dwarves on page 20 of the 5e Player's Handbook. And it talks about their tool proficiencies, the languages they can speak. Now, the difference between this character race, rather, character race versus other editions is they make a differentiation between the different types of dwarves. Like in the current game that I'm playing, it's a 5e game. I play a hill dwarf because I was also playing a cleric. And when you're a hill dwarf, you have keen senses, and your wisdom score increases by 1, which, as if everybody knows, the cleric class, their main statistic has always been wisdom, for obvious reasons, casting spells and praying to your deity and that type of thing. So your ability score will increase by one, your wisdom score rather, if you're a hill dwarf. Now, if you're a mountain dwarf, this is the subset of dwarfs in fifth edition. As a mountain dwarf, your strength score increases by two. So if you are going to play, let's say a cleric, cleric or cleric fighter combination or something like that in fifth edition, well, just a cleric, you want to go with the mountain. I'm sorry, with the hill dwarf, which is what I chose, because the hill dwarf gives you that bonus to your ability, to your wisdom ability. But if you're going to play a warrior or a fighter, I guess it's a full fighter, then you would want to take the mountain dwarf variety because that increases your strength by two. Um, so that's the fifth, some of the traits on the fifth edition. Now, by contrast, if you have a dwarf in second edition, it's pretty much pretty similar in terms of their abilities, although they have racial ability adjustments in second edition. So in second edition, the dwarf gets a +1 uh, to its constitution, but it also gets a -1 to its charisma, which is different. You know, um, I'm thinking their reasoning was okay. They're gruff. They don't really get along with a number of evil races like the orcs, and also not don't get along with everybody. They distrust. The book says that it's hard for them to trust other races initially, and so they do get a -1 charisma as a result, which is now carried over into the current game. Let's see what else. So it's pretty interesting because second edition dwarves, if you're a mountain variety, a mountain dwarf, you get a +2 to strength in fifth edition, and you get a +2 to constitution, as we mentioned, and you get if you're a hill dwarf though, you get a +1 to wisdom. And if you're, which we mentioned, you could be a cleric. And then if you're a high elf, oh, I'm sorry, that's wrong race. So those are the dwarves. Let's see, charisma in fifth edition is not something that gets affected for the dwarf. You know, so yeah, that's pretty much it along in terms of racial adjustments. Although I will say that for second edition, they did have more of a description in terms of the bonuses that you get, and the big distinction that it doesn't apply on fifth edition, because on fifth edition they do talk about how the dwarves are resilient. Let's see, get the actual wording on that. The dwarf traits, so they get their dwarven resilience, and dwarven combat, and a number of proficiencies. Um, see, speed. The walking speed is 25 feet. They have dark vision, of course, and then the dwarven resilience is that they get advantage on saving throws against poison, and they also have resistance against poison damage. And this was the same, a trait of that carried over from the previous editions, because in second edition they were also typically had those uh, bonuses against the on their saving throws. So it says this is from the second edition description. By nature, the ones are non-magical and never use magical spells. Clerical spells are allowed, however. So you can be a cleric in both editions, but this emphasis on the dwarves not really being non-magical is not really talked about much in the fifth edition description, but it is in second edition. So they're not proficient with magic. So that gives them a bonus to their dwarves to the saving throws against attacks from magical wands. magical wands, slaves, rods, and spells in second edition. And it is a bonus of +1 for every 3.5 points of Constitution score. For example, if a dwarf has a Constitution score of 7, he gains +2 on saving throws. So it kept going up. It increases not by level, by your Constitution score. So if you had a Constitution of, let's say, 14, then your saving throws would be a +4 against magical items and or spells or on the saving throws. And then if you had like an 18, which was the highest, you would get a +5. And in the same vein, in 2E, the dwarves have exceptional resistance to toxic substances. So this did carry over. While we talked about it just a little while ago about how they're resistant to toxins in the current game in fifth edition. All dwarven characters make saving throws against poison with the same bonuses that they get against magical attacks. So that was mentioned that because of their non-magical nature in second edition, dwarves have trouble using magical items, and it's not the case in fifth edition. In fifth edition, if you're a dwarf, well, if both editions, if you're a cleric, that you can use magic. I mean, cleric is part of the class. I should say magic is part of the cleric class, but um, because of their non-magical nature in second edition, all magical items that are not specifically suited to the character's class have a 20% chance to malfunction when used by a dwarf. Very interesting how this emphasis on being a non-magical creature or having an aversion to magic is not something that they really kind of focus too much on second edition when it comes to the dwarfs. Okay, guys, now let's focus on another race, which is the humans. Um, I probably won't have as much to say about humans because the book doesn't have as much to say about humans. Neither one does. The fifth edition players handbook actually has a little bit more to say about the humans because there's different types. They have subsets of humans, whereas the second edition book does talk about humans, but it's like a paragraph. Basically what they say is that although humans are treated as a single race, they come in all the varieties we know on Earth, and a human player character can have whatever racial characteristics the DM allows, but they only have one special ability, and that is they can be of any character class, and they can rise to any level in any class, which is significant in second edition because the other PC races they have limited choices in those areas. They have restrictions on what level they can attain, and they also they can't be any class, so they have restrictions on class, primarily based on their ability scores, as we discussed earlier. Um, and that's it. That's pretty much all that the second edition book says about the human race. That they have those very powerful um, that they don't have limitations on their classes and those powerful attributes. But other than that, there's not much to say. Now, the human race in fifth edition it's kind of similar in their approach, where they don't really have a lot to say, other than that they have different human names and ethnicities. Like they'll have the Kalisite, the Kondothan, the Damaran, Iluxan, Mulan, Rashmi. Those are like examples of like different humans in different demographics or geographies. Um, but the human traits, their ability score increase each by 1. So that's kind of like the advantage, so that your ability scores keep increasing as you progress your character. Um, and they can be any alignment because there are all kinds of evil humans, just like in real life. There's evil people and there's people that are lawful, and they can speak a bunch of languages. Now there is a variant human trait that they campaign the fifth edition campaign alludes to, and that is the optional feat rules, which are found in chapter 5 of um, of the uh, of the player's handbook. So if you're using these variant rules, the ability scores they can pick humans can pick two different scores to increase by one instead of just the one. And their skills, they gain proficiency on one skill of their choice, and they also gain one feat of your choice. Now, feats were introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, if I'm not mistaken, in the third edition, which is a completely different game system, obviously, than 2E, than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But they were a lot more detailed. There were a lot more feats to choose from. In fifth edition, you can find them on chapter 5 of the player's handbook, which is it's kind of a weird place. I mean, I guess because before that they were talking about equipment, and there's a whole bunch of a big section on equipment, and then they talk about feats on page 165 to be exact of the player's handbook, and it says that a feat represents a talent or an area of expertise that gives a character special capabilities. It embodies training, experience, and abilities beyond what a class provides. At certain levels, your class can give you the ability score improvement feature. um, Using the optional features, you can forego taking that feature to take a feat of your choice instead. So some of the feats that they mention are some of them are kind of cool. I mean, there's the alert where you can be an alert, always on the lookout for danger, and you get a +5 to your initiative. Or you could be an actor, which increases your charisma score. The charger, the charger feat is when you use your action to dash, you can use a bonus action to make one melee weapon attack or to shove a creature, and it gives you gain either a +5 bonus to the attack damage roll, or you can also push the target 10 feet away from you. So that's kind of like World of Warcraft. If you play a warrior, you know that you can charge. It's kind of the same deal. You zoom into to your uh, to your uh, to your target, and you just start like whacking them. So that's the charger feat in the. You can be a dual wielder, so you can use double the weapons. Um, you can be a healer. When you use a healer's kit to stabilize a dying creature, that creature also regains one hit point. And as an action, you can spend one use of a healer's kit to tend to a creature and restore 1d6 plus 4 hit points to it. Plus additional hit points equal to the creature's maximum number of hit dice. Now that's kind of silly to me. It's like, um, if you want to heal, just play a cleric. You know why be a human and then take a feat on healing? Just play a cleric. You know, you can heal all you want. So that one's kind of silly. But there's some of them that are kind of cool. You can be like, you can have a magic initiative. Um, you can have be a polearm master. When you take the attack action and attack with only a glaive, halberd, or quarterstaff, you can use a bonus action to make a melee attack with the opposite end of the weapon. So it gives you some proficiency or some bonus with that type of weapon. So it doesn't. To summarize, the human race, the second edition, is that's just one obvious advantage of playing a human, and in fifth edition you do get a bunch of feats that you can choose. But other than that, it doesn't have a lot to it. And personally, I wouldn't play a human. Like in any game, while you're a human, I've said this before. If you're a human, or told people, if you're a human in real life and you're playing a fantasy type video game or D&D, tabletop game, whatever, you have so many options. Why would you be a boring human? And in Warcraft, I guess in Warcraft they have a little bit of flavor. For example, like in that MMO, it started as humans against orcs. Again, the orcs are always the evil race, so the humans fighting the orcs, and then they morphed into an MMO. And by that time, they had a bunch of other races like the elves and the elves, orcs, humans, and like the undead. And so they had a bunch of different options to choose from, and there is more flavor because you had the two factions. And I guess if you like the alliance, you could be like a general leading an army of humans against the horde. The only real human that I did like playing like in Warcraft was like the Galneas humans, the turn into Wargen, and I was like when they first had the Wargen class, which is kind of like a feral werewolf type creature, and I was like, oh man, when they had that expansion, I think it was Cataclysm in Warcraft when they introduced the Wargen, they gave each faction a different an additional race, and so the the alliance, which are with the humans, they got the Wargen, and then Horde got the goblins, and I was like, ah, that really sucks. I really wish we had the Wargen. Like alliance always, I mean the Horde got screwed on that one because it would have been so cool to have like werewolves on the Horde. But then when I play, I did actually because I was curious, and I like the fact that they were kind of behind they erected a wall. They kind of sort of they were being attacked by the scourge, and so they erected their own. They were behind a fortress, and for a long time they sort of cut themselves away off from the world of Azeroth. And so that was kind of cool. I like that story idea. And I played, that's the only time I played a human. I wanted to be, and it makes sense to me after I played it, because from a story perspective, they're human up to like 10th level, and then they get the curse, and then they become a warrior. So they transform, and they have the werewolf curse. And so then I realized, oh, that's why they gave it to the Alliance, because they're not, they don't start off being Wargen. They start off being human. So, that's it. But other than that, I've never played human as a race in any fantasy-based MMO or tabletop or D&D, because there's so many other good options. But that's just my bias. If you want to play a human, go ahead. Those are the limited options that you get on 2E. Well, admittedly, it's not really limited. I mean, you do get to be any class, which is good. But in fifth edition, doesn't make that much of a difference, because you can have multi-classing, and you can pretty much be any class you want depending on the race. There's not any hardly any race slash class combo restrictions like they have, like we talked about in second edition. So um, don't see that much of an advantage of being a human in D&D these days. But that's just me.